Welcome everyone to this session in our wonderful Liviana conference. It's session 6.3 on new scholarship in community economies, which is basically a wonderful initiative to put new scholarship in community economies that emerged or that has really come to the fore in the occasion of the Winter Summer School, which is run by Community Economies Institute, to put some of these new authorial voices in conversation with the editors of the Diverse Economies and Livable World series, which is a series that is hosted by the University of Minnesota Press, and a series that is a tremendous effort of this community, and especially on behalf of the editors, J.K. Gibson-Graham, Stephen Healy, Kevin St. Martin, and Maliha Safri, who are the latter two are here today, and it's really a wonderful series. I'm grateful myself for the work that they've put into helping me promote and build my book, which was a long and suffering process from a PhD thesis to a book. So thanks for that. And my name is Christina Jerne. I'm calling in from Copenhagen, Denmark, and my role here will be to keep time and to make sure the conversations run smoothly. So we'll begin just by having a little go around where everyone just introduces themselves and perhaps just says where they are and maybe even why they're here. And I will pass the word to Markus, who's first on my list. Oh, and wait, before we start this, actually, I just wanted to ask the speakers if it was okay with you if Markus presented first, because he has an emergency, or no, he has a baby in the house, and time is precious. Colm is giving a thumbs up, and so is Noortje. So we'll then go with Markus first, and then Noortje, and then Colm last. Okay, so Markus, please. The word is yours.
Okay, first a small introduction round, right? So I'm Markus, I'm from Leipzig, Germany. I joined not only because I'm a presenter today, but also because I'm very curious to listen to the other two. I'm also currently working with Colm on the project, so I'm also very excited that we both are here right now in one session and can present work which is not related to our project. That's it from my side.
Great. Would you maybe pass the word on to someone else?
Colm, please go.
Cheers, Markus. Yeah, my name's Colm. I'm from Ireland, but I'm living in Athens in Greece. Came here to do my PhD in Padun University, so I'm still here. And yeah, I'm doing a postdoc now that's collaborating with Markus, so it's kind of nice fate that we're in the same session. I took part in the Norway summer school last year, so I was actually with Kevin. And yeah, no, it was a really enjoyable experience, and I think just diverse in community economies, it was I know a way of thinking and framework, I guess, that really helped me in my PhD, and I kind of used it a lot. So yeah, I guess just to kind of share my work with others, but then also, yeah, learn about other people. Also, if they finished the PhD, they did a similar process, and just to see their work, I thought it was a nice kind of format. So that's why I'm here. I'll pass on to Ignacio.
Hello, I'm Ignacio Krell. I'm joining from southern Chile. And I was interested in this session because, well, a few reasons. One is that as a Community Economies Institute member, I've been part of the summer winter school, so it's interesting for me to to see a little bit of the impact that this school may have, but also because I am currently working on my own PhD thesis, so I want to just check out what other people in other parts of the world are doing. So yeah, so I pass it to Antonia.
All right. Hello, my name is Antonia Casellas. I'm at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. I'm very happy and very glad to be here. I know some of you, being Ignacio one, because he's a member of the Latin America group. And I also met Cristina some time ago in Italy when she was working her book, and I was working in translations of the work of Gibson and Graham. And very glad, very happy to be here, and also very interested to know about the work that emerged from the new scholars on the frame of the community economies. So I pass to Maliha. I say wrong. I don't know.
No, that's correct. That's correct.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. What a great group. I'm really honored to be here. And I, have always sort of thought that the work coming out of this project has been so, interesting, important for the world, and I've thought, okay, this is a project I'd like to support in many, many different kinds of ways, including working in it myself. And I know we're, but this is on topic, right? So just this 2025, I published along with my co-authors, Mariana Pawlowskaya and Stephen Healy and Craig Borowiak. We published this book. And it's been an interesting time to be thinking about post-capitalist politics in urban contexts. And it feels like in some ways this is a sort of deeply terrible political moment, obviously, in terms of fascist regimes rising in many different countries, but it is also a moment where a lot of people, I think, are really hungry for also doing something different. I'll stop there and pass the word to Tom.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name's Tom, based in the north of Spain. And yeah, I'm just really here out of curiosity. I know of Markus's work, so I'm always interested in learning more about what he's been up to. I'm based in the north of Spain, so Noor's work in Galicia also is very much of interest. It's not so far from here. And yeah, you're very interested to learn about what Colm's been up to. And yeah, I've been involved in a couple of iterations of the summer school, so nice to sort of follow that process and see what people have been up to. And I will pass it to Kevin. Have you introduced yourself?
No, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing everything that you're about to share. Really appreciate it. I'm calling in from New Jersey, Rutgers University in the United States. Yeah, I just thinking, echoing what people have said, so great to see what happens after the summer school, right? So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll pass it on to Kanan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Kanan Thakkar. I'm originally from India. Currently, I'm based in the United States, University of Delaware, pursuing my PhD. I'm in my third year now. I'm doing a PhD in geography. So I've been introduced to post-capitalism and post-capitalist feminist political ecology, and I've been reading a lot of post-development. And I'm developing my dissertation around cultural heritage as commons. And I have been reading Gibson Graham's work, End of Capitalism. So out of curiosity, like others as well, first time joining community economies and willing to connect with people, hear about everyone's work. So happy to be here. Thank you.
I think Allison might be the only one who hasn't.
Sorry, I forgot to pass it on to someone.
Hi everyone. I see everyone has their camera, so I put my camera. Yes, my name is Alison Guzman. I'm based here in southern Chile. I've been a member of the CEI since I think 2016, 17. I don't remember, Ignacio, but I work directly with the Mapuche communities of Lake Buli region. And I was both on the mentoring side of the summer school a couple of years, but also a student. At one point I was able to also do the summer course online. So I'm excited. And CEI is always talking on the forefront of these issues. So I'm really excited to learn and hear everyone's discussions today. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think that's everyone. Or not? No? Anyone?
I think me. Hi.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
No
Noortje, of
worries.
course.
I'm here in my cave in the dark. So hi, I'm Noortje. I finished my PhD a couple of months ago and been kind of out of, this whole computer world thing. So I'm just taking this talk to come back in and kind of reconnect also with others and talk a little bit about my PhD, which I really enjoyed. I did the summer school like 3 years ago, I think, and it was a good way into my PhD. However, my PhD isn't built particularly only on community economies, but I think there's a good dialogue possible. So I think that's what I would also like to see today or engage in. And for the rest, I'm from the Netherlands, but I live in Galicia in the north of Spain.
Right, splendid. So I think that might be everyone now. And now it's Markus. Markus's turn to present. Markus, do you have any slides you'd like to share or?
I do have.
Okay. I won't introduce the title of your work because sometimes that changes last minute. So go ahead and present yourself.
Yes, maybe I should also shortly at least say that I think I attended the summer school in 2022. And since then, and even a bit before, I used to work already with the diverse and community economies approach. First, I encountered it as a political science student in my master's degree, even when we talked about alternative food systems. But now it took me to a different path. So now I was working the last 5 years on enterprises in Armenia and Georgia, and the title of my dissertation is, as you can see here, Surviving Well Together in the Web of Life, an examination of enterprises in ordinary peripheries of Armenia and Georgia. I don't talk today too much about this ordinary periphery because we should focus on our takeaways a bit. I give you a short historical background of Armenia and Georgia because I think not many of you might be well aware what happened there. So Armenia and Georgia in the 1990s, there was this Soviet dissolution, disintegration, and the two countries embarked on something which was called shock therapy. So all of a sudden they followed the Latin American model, but did it in a very short time: privatization, liberalization, deregulation, the effect of which was like economic collapse, out-migration, migration to the capital city, and what was called the return to subsistence or semi-subsistence economies. At the same time, other enterprises came in, trade deficit emerged, and what you can see below, for example, is that mostly they are right now exporters for metals and diamonds. In the case of Georgia, it's actually imported cars that are again exported, which is one of the main export commodities. Later on, also some kind of foreign direct investment-led development emerges, but also this kind of endogenous enterprise support. On the top, you can see Silicon Valley, Tbilisi, which is the capital city of Georgia, and this idea, which many, I think, capitalocentric thinkers have, like we all need some kind of Silicon Valley in our countries to properly develop. Within the countries, there is a kind of, let's say, limited critique of this developmentalist model. When we look, for example, at party politics, there usually it's about talking about lack of institutions, it's corruption, maybe it's the opposition's fault that there is no such thing as development. And sometimes it can be also a people whose fault it is. And here we have and I want to read it. It's a long citation, and it's from a person that is called Papava, who's both a professor from Georgia, but at the same time, he used to be also Minister of the Economy in the 90s. So this is very telling, maybe also what he has to say here. He says, many contemporary entrepreneurs can be considered as striking examples of Homo transformaticus. So this is after Homo sovieticus. They make their enterprises function at the minimum capacity necessary to satisfy personal and family needs and the needs of the small number of workers employed at the enterprise. This type of entrepreneur has no interest in expanding his enterprise because Homo economicus has not been fully awoken in him. We need to transform Homo transformaticus into Homo economicus. The faster we do so, the faster we shall achieve a market economy. So this is very interesting on various levels. One thing is, of course, like the market economy is the thing to go for, which you can realize. The other thing, and we come to this later, is this kind of despiseful attitude towards sufficiency. Interestingly, probably I agree with Papava that many of the enterprises are sufficiency oriented, but I think with our diverse and community framework, we maybe can also normatively reframe this as something that shouldn't be like debunked immediately. Now I give you again a bit of context about enterprise research and practice in the two countries. First is a bit about research. When there is research about entrepreneurialism in the two countries, it mostly starts with finding some allegedly universally valid economic model that has usually its roots in the global north and applying it, something like national innovation system, regional innovation system, global value chains. And then you also have something like Armenia and Georgia, usually on these indicators of entrepreneurialism and innovation. They have these top-notch high rankings within the post-Soviet countries. But of course, if you look at the worldwide level, it would be still very much below. And often this is used to say like, okay, we're already good in our group of post-Soviet countries, but we need more of this, let's say, innovation-induced catch-up development. I cannot give you the whole picture here, so I give you two, let's say, indicators of it. So on the picture above, you see the former Prime Minister of Georgia visiting the opening of the 7th McDonald's in Zugdidi, and you see also in the news how it proudly says with the latest technology and equipment. On the other hand, you have below the ministry structure in Armenia, and you see that there is a Ministry of High-Tech Industry, which probably accounts for less than 1% of the workforce. But you don't even have a Ministry for Agriculture, which is probably responsible for the overall, for most of the workforce and this, let's say, return to subsistence economy. So now we have in this context the overarching research question like how locally rooted enterprises in peripherized places of Armenia and Georgia contribute to surviving well together. I spare you right now the details of the structure of the dissertation. What is maybe good to know is like I depart from the surviving well together, which I will not explain here too much because it's something, let's say, very community economies oriented. I apply it in this, what I call here, ordinary peripheries of Armenia and Georgia. And then I try to contribute to enterprises, and I will do so. And I will have two takeaways from here by expanding the political economy vocabulary, which so far I think was centered in the diverse economy tradition very much about this collective production, appropriation and distribution of the surplus on the one hand. In other political economy accounts, however, also on this use value, like we should produce things that satisfy true non-annihilated human needs. And I try to reconstruct this political economy account by also adding sufficiency value and community place value in my dissertation. Here you see also like, let's say in my literature review, how I expand in this. So I hope also diverse and community economies would say, we could apply this more or less to Armenia and Georgia, but in so doing, I realized there are some issues also with only focusing on this use value and necessary surplus labor aspect. Soon, small note on the methodology. I did something which I call a multi-scalar patchwork ethnography at times of COVID-19, and in the specific case of Armenia, one also has to say the Nagorno-Karabakh war that re-emerged. I used a variety of sources. I interpreted it with what I call a reading for diffraction, which I think is basically asking which diverse economic practices matter for whom and why. And I theorize, or try to theorize, what the enterprise could be, rather than doing any claims what the enterprise is. I think this is maybe very familiar to the group here, but usually if I talk to people not familiar with community economies, it's important to indicate. I myself neither from Armenia nor Georgia. I'm born in Germany. For a volunteer service, I emerged 20 years ago in Georgia. And since then, I'm more or less stuck in the region. Since 15 years, I often go there. My wife is also from there. So there is this contact with the region more in Georgia than in Armenia, I have to admit. Here you see a small map also of the two countries and also of all the enterprises that I did research on. And maybe here just to say, like, there was this kind of opportunistic sampling, like I cooperated only with those enterprises that I found theoretically appealing, but that also had a desire to cooperate, basically. I start right now with some more riddles in my study, which also show you why I had to go beyond this surplus that is very dear to diverse community economies. So on the one hand, there was almost no surplus value that I could find in Armenian and Georgian enterprises. If there was some kind of wage labor, some kind of necessary labor, it would mostly fall very short of securing even basic reproduction. And just today on Facebook, I saw this meme, which you see on the right, with the circles of good salaries by work balance, where Eastern Europe, if you count Armenia and Georgia to it, doesn't have any kind of connection to either of these circles. So this very much maybe also sums it up in a kind of semi-humorous, dark sarcasm way. Moreover, we also see, of course, in the political economy tradition, this focus on cooperatives. Additionally, I think one has to say in Armenia and Georgia, as former parts of the Soviet Union, there are still these, let's say, ghosts of collectivization, which was a political project and which was an extremely painful project. So many people, when they hear cooperative, they think rather about the re-emerging Stalinism or Bolshevism than about any emancipatory project. There are cooperatives, I also work with one, but yeah, in the literature and also my impression, many of these might be also a bit donor-driven, for example, by the European Union. Although there was no surplus that I could see, I saw a lot of other economic practices. And this led me to ask, maybe it's as much interesting to look at this, what is called in political economy, necessary labor, than surplus labor and its appropriation distribution. And this kind of complication here, I follow Miller, led me then to this sufficiency, which right now I think also many other community economy scholars work on. So here, sufficiency in the web of life, first takeaway. I start again with maybe mapping it on the diverse economies. I think it is anti-essentialist thinking on which diverse economies or builds up. Several sites in relation to the enterprises have been empirically evaded. Here you see, for example, the People's Account, which is a tool in Take Back the Economy. And here you see above these kind of non-labor production inputs. They say like this is the basic structure of an enterprise. In the subsequent analysis of the People's Account, these non-labor production inputs, they disappear altogether. And they focus on this various decision flashpoints, which all have to do with how necessary surplus labor is distributed. What we can already see, however, is that if you exclude these non-labor production inputs, you maybe also exclude household labor, community labor, suppliers. All this kind of falls short, and I think this is something that we should actually include. So first of all, I think we have to look at the enterprise interacting with all these specific sites. And I think there is the analytical vocabulary, but so far empirically, there has been not too much focus on those. Other political economy traditions know, of course, about this, let's say, interconnections. And here you see a picture above, for example, from the kind of feminist political economy that also says in this very capitalocentric way of theorizing, capitalism also depends on best labor, mostly care labor. And they have articulated this relation, but usually as a story of theft, of parasitism, appropriation, that if I have a surplus, it builds and undermines even your survival. And I think most authors that have this relational understanding have also this capitalocentric understanding of it. But what here is the question, if it's not only this kind of parasitism, but also some sorts what you could call commensalism or mutualism between the enterprise and these invisibilized and co-constitutive others. So I think instead of surplus possibilities, maybe we could also talk about these interdependent sufficiency possibilities. Now the empirical illustrations of sufficiency relations. So on the top, you see in one of the enterprises that I worked with, a picture when they had to install a new well. And you could see on this village here also a lot of villagers. So these villagers, they helped. So they didn't also say they worked, but they helped in installing the well for this enterprise, which you could say they are preying on unpaid labor of the community. But, this is not really, I think, what is going on there, because there are longer episodes of reciprocal help when the enterprise actually also lends machinery, tools, their own labor to the village. The same company, Temi, also goes to another cooperative right now that I work with, which was Chaduna for the rose harvest, which was also very interesting. Although they could also work in Temi, they went to this other company because they urgently needed some people doing the rose harvest. This was, however, not paid back in cash, but they were feasting together basically. And generally, although I wouldn't see a lot of surplus, I would see a lot of feasting also. And the question with feasting is really, is just in the realm of necessity or in the realm of surplus. And again, maybe it's in the realm of sufficiency to do this. Picture below shows some pro bono wine tasting at Temi. And another thing which I can maybe say about this Chaduna is this was at some point closed. And I think with this angle of interconnected sufficiency possibilities, you can also see the closure of Chaduna. You can reinterpret it because it was closed because some woman said, like, we have other more necessary work to do. And Chaduna right now is not our priority. And I think this maybe also helps to understand that you cannot isolatedly look at the enterprise if you don't take into account how it's connected to other sides. The second thing right now, community place value. I try to make this a bit shorter. So most enterprises here in Armenia and Georgia are located in places with a long history of dis and misplaced. And I, in the introduction, focused a lot on this post-Soviet disintegration, but of course there's also Soviet imperialism before Russian imperialism. Before that, you could also say the kind of Ottoman Empire that played a role. And as such, there was also a lot of dis and misplacement of people. Think about the Armenian genocide, of plants, of animals, of objects. And as some other colleagues from community economies, like Baron said, like there's also this tendency then, if there is displacements, maybe there should be also something happening as re- and emplacements. On the right hand, I will now talk a bit about wine. Many people also associate, especially Georgia, with wine. One has to say, however, the following with wine. So I focus on an entrepreneur in the western part of Georgia. And this western part of Georgia in the 16th century also came under rule of the Ottoman Empire, which destroyed basically all viticulture, and viticulture was basically vine culture. And you could already say at this point, viticulture kind of was displaced. At some point when the Russian Empire emerged, also new varieties came into the region, especially from plant, because that was right now considered more cool. And during the Soviet Union, you had this kind of spatial concentration of production generally, which led to a concentration of production of wine in the eastern part, whereas the western part was completely erased from this wine production part. And you have something then establishing as contemporary vineyards. This Georgi Natanadze that you see above, he had like this idea to revitalize the wine tradition from, let's say, Ottoman and maybe pre-Ottoman times. And what he did, like he went into the forest and he tried to find in the forest traces of old wine varieties. And he forages those wines. So he's a wine forager. There is also the symbiosis between the wine grapes and the trees. And generally, this is one production method that also is organic without needing any kind of herbicides or pesticides, which are actually a big problem if you look at it in Georgia, because there is a lot of this wine hype, but there is also this minus side that is usually monocultures, and that most of the herbicide and pesticide usage in Georgia, and usually this kind of very chemical pesticides. And now I lost myself, but yeah, so they don't use that. Sorry for this. Moreover, he also tried to establish what the Ottomans also destroyed, this kind of wine terraces. So that was also culture of wine terraces. He tried to build it with the communities, gives pro bono consultations also for others. So the synthesis, and I think now I also have to shortly stop. I think enterprises can contribute not only through this necessary exchange, necessary surplus labor nexus, but also when we look at the role of community place value and something that we could call sufficiency value. And still, I would take from the other political economy traditions that we should still talk, of course, about exploitation, that we should talk about appropriation, that we should talk also about use values. I just hope to offer with these four things a kind of expansion of the vocabulary, and it's not meant to displace the current focus on surplus and necessary labor or use value. The main implications, maybe I will skip them because I'm above time.
Thank you, Markus. That was spot on. 20 minutes. Thank you very much for such a, wow, a tour through theory and Armenia and Georgia and all kinds of different types of livelihoods. We'll now have to move on to the next presentation, and we'll have the presentations in a row and then have reactions from Stephen and Maliha afterwards. So Noortje, if you are ready to go next, then it's your go.
Yes. All right. I remember how to do this. Tiki. I have a presentation. There we go. Thank you, Markus, for your presentation. It was very informative, but intimidating now. But that's okay. So I have made this little presentation. A ver. I think, is it presenting now? Yes. Yes, I think so.
Yes, we see it. We see it.
Okay, great. Okay. So I made this presentation. Actually, I didn't know what to present, and then I got this email from Jenny Cameron saying to focus on one idea and to, make a presentation about one idea that emerges from your thesis, which is really hard, actually. Hey, psst. Sorry, I have a cat. Which is actually quite hard, but I tried to do so. So my presentation is called Foregrounding Imagination in Environmental Governance. My name is Noortje, and I'm part of the Post-Growth Innovation Lab in the University of Vigo, but we're located in Pontevedra. And I'll just kind of talk globally about my thesis, but then zoom into one case study to make a particular point, which I think could be an interesting conversational starter with communities, economies, scholarship, and also, just to get feedback from what this sparks in your thinking. I think that's what I'm kind of interested in. So anyway, my PhD thesis is located in the realms of a lot of realms, but basically about environmental governance, particularly forestry, historical commons, and commoning, going into these kinds of different scholarly rooms, historical forestry policy, and particularly really building on socio-technical imaginaries and co-production as like theoretical lenses through which I approach environmental governance issues, particularly in forestry in Galicia. So the main message of today's presentation is that foregrounding imagination and ways of knowing to more fully explore economic activities and their potential for transformation. I think it's something that maybe we can think about in the realm of community economy scholarship. So anyway, where am I? My thesis about the Galician monte, basically. And monte is this word which I still can't translate to English, but it's basically like landscape, or I don't know, mostly forestry, but it's not used to be forestry. So I mean, that was really also what started my thesis, just the question, what is the monte? Which is a very simple question, but actually turned into this whole thesis thing. So anyway, I'm in the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula, where I put a lot of data on here, but where basically what I want to say is that a fourth of the land is commons land, so officially recognized as commonly owned. It cannot be divided, it cannot be traded, it cannot be sold, it cannot be inherited. The only way for you to have a say over land is by living in a certain place. So I'm living in a place, and just because I live here, I'm renting a house, I have the right to co-decide together with my neighbors over what happens with the land. And we're talking about extensions of here 400 hectares right next to my house, right? So this is kind of a very curious governance scheme and so on. And there's only 50,000 hectares of public land, so there's very little public land. And then there's this phenomena of minifundismo, which is that all these lands are divided into the families and their kids and the grandkids, and everybody just has a tiny little plot of land. So also when you're talking about forestry and big plantations, the commons are really an important site to explore these frictions, which is what my work kind of contends with. And historically, so my thesis starts with an historical analysis of state intervention to kind of organize the monte in pursuit of a certain imaginary. And the particular thing that's important for my presentation today is that in the last 50 years, the amount of eucalyptus in Galicia has increased from about 30,000 hectares to 400,000 hectares. So you can imagine this, it's a green desert, what many people call it. Yeah. So anyway, as I said, different actors engage in future making in the Galician monte. So in my thesis, I talk about commons communities, state forestry actors, and NGOs and activists. So just to touch upon the historical state intervention, which I could talk about for the next 3 hours, but I'm not going to, so I'm just going to briefly touch on these periods that I've stipulated based on a literature review and historical documents, newspapers, whatever. All these kinds of sources. So first, there's the restoration period, which was really just like we want to restore these lost forests, the great nature, and so on. So we want a separate forestry organ. We want the state to own forests. We want people out of the land, or to educate them to be, educated in conserving nature, or our idea of nature. And the public here is really described as sensational, frivolous, unable to deal with mature matters. This kind of, how do you say, like stupidization of peasants and of rural communities in a way. Anyway, then an important transition is during the Franco dictatorship. From the 1940s until the 1978, I made this period based on different historical events. Anyway, Franco and the dictatorship really changed the Galician monte and just all of Spain by violently excluding people from their lands, not allowing people to make use of the lands that they had been using to graze their animals, to cut wood to use at home, and so on. Just completely cut these kinds of subsistence economies towards productive monocultures, pine and later eucalyptus, constructing cellulose factories, and really making this industrial future and this great nation through industrial growth, firstly for like autocratic growth, but later also open to international trade and so on. So also just planning all these zones for productivity, so eucalyptus in Galicia. So really, yeah, planning for growth rather than in the period for planning for conservation. And then later we go into sustainable development when Spain integrated into the European Union. And there's, in my thesis, I talk about, you know, today's green productivism, which is still really using these methods that were previously developed to today pursue a green growth imaginary. Anyway, that's just the background. In my thesis, then I talk about this resonating with neoliberal environmental governance and very neoliberal centric analysis. Like you could have a very neoliberal centric analysis, but I wanted to do something different. I think that also resonates with community economies, to kind of consider how people act against such a grand narrative and to construct their own practices and different imaginaries, actually. So in that sense, I set up the imaginative space in which actors move. I talk about co-production as mutual emergence. Well, I don't actually, Jason I've introduced this, about how you think about the world and how it ought to be. So it's really turning the analysis towards knowledge and how do we know where we are, where we want to go, what the monte even is, right? And how that actually informs very interesting analyses of environmental governance. And then the authoritativeness of particular forms of knowledge in ordering nature and society in quest for better environmental governance in these historical periods, then in pursuit of growth, of economic growth, of green growth, but very much centering the analysis on how do we know the forest, how do we know society, what kind of methods do we use to kind of gain such knowledge and share such knowledge. And then also talking about social technical imaginaries as collectively held and publicly performed visions of desirable futures that are attainable through science and technology advances. But here I really talk about how ordering also the forest is a way of achieving a better future through a particular ordering of natural or socio-ecological processes. So this turns me to my case study, which is what I really wanted to talk about today. Which is with the Brigadas de Eucaliptidadoras. It's an NGO, but it's made of, well, it's volunteers, basically. 1,400 people are signed up to this initiative. And this is a quote from my interviews. I really wanted to talk more about my interviews and the people that I engage with in my study. It's like the A-team. The A-team would go wherever there was a call for help. A hitman was hired and the problem was solved. Well, the Brigadas are the A-team of the trees and anyone can call us. So what they do is they remove unwanted trees from the monte. I use this vocabulary because I want to talk about what makes these trees unwanted, right? But they particularly target eucalyptus and acacia. And these are based on traditional practices of roga and albaroque, which is roga is like a call for work, which really goes back to these commons practices that were kind of before the Franco dictatorship and the taking away of common lands from communities, which is we're going to go work together and then later we'll share a meal together. So that's the albaroque. There's about 1 roga per month and about 30 to 40 people join each session, and they're organized in convenios, so in like collaborations with Comunidades de Montes, which are commons communities. So it's always, you know, some people think that the brigadas, you know, they just go to the monte and cut down trees wherever they want, but that's not true. It's always in collaboration with local communities who have projects for longer term restoration and changing of the monte. So anyway, these are some photos of the ways of destruction, is what I call it in my work, because in the end we are, you know, destroying trees. So we're cutting them down with motosierra, the chainsaw. We're pulling them out and we're debarking, I think, which is when you tear away the bark and the tree gets sick and dies. So it's kind of like these fungi come in and it's a groovy collaboration for destruction. And then eucalyptus, so the similar methods. These are some photos that I took of the monte where we're working. Okay, I don't know how I'm doing for time. So anyway, in my case study, I talk about imagining acts of destruction as care. So it's this chapter and the work that kind of goes stems from my case study, talks in conversation to more than human care and commoning, which is often described as collaborative, as reciprocal, and so on. Whereas, I think you're good on time, thank you. However, in my study with bringing in imagination, I talk about destruction as care, to kind of open a door towards maybe thinking theoretically about actions, activities that don't seem care, like more like how do you say, harmonic, that are not harmonic, but they're destructive, in order for new things to emerge, desired forms of life, and forms of life desired by a particular community of people. Of course, that's, this is a case study. So anyway, my interlocutors, they target these specific trees to care for a desired community that they imagine the monte should be, right? So turning towards imaginaries then allows to kind of compare how, the state imagines the monte as a motor for growth, for prosperity in this sense. And there's other people that have different imaginaries of what the monte, or what a forest, or what it should be, and how this imaginary then also links to forms of knowledge. And that's kind of where the point that I also want to make. So anyway, this is also a long quote, but it's interesting. For me, the acacias are like murderers of imagined children, because they cover everything, all of the monte. They don't let the little oak trees grow as they are. If they could live and share the monte, I obviously would not cut them down, but they eat the small ones, the small oaks, and then they go ahead making their own way. For me, an acacia tree is like a murderer, like a pedophile, a murderer. I wouldn't feel sorry for killing them. Even though I'm a super pacifist, I would not feel sorry because they kill. Obviously, this quote is, interesting, also story-wise, but it does show this violence that people, the brigadistas, feel to these trees, and this violence is very much a reciprocal act because of the violence that people feel these trees are committing to other forms of life, but also to people themselves when they're trying to cut these trees down. So here also, however, where there are eucalyptus trees, where there are acacias, it's like, I don't know, it's that aggressiveness. We are here and we don't let anything else prosper. So this is one of the pillars of the imaginary that the brigadas work towards, is like conviviality, living together, and in a way that they think is fair, obviously, which is without eucalyptus or acacias. And then another part which is important, and I talk about in my thesis, and is also related to the historical analysis that I do, is that brigadistas also often talk about auto-odio, or this self-hate that is installed, that they imagine is instilled in Galician society, which is derived from this historical interventions into common lands, into forbidding traditional practices, into forbidding the Galician language, and kind of wanting to overturn this by destroying these trees. So it's to overturn historical bullying at the hands of the state and depreciation of Galician culture. So there's this quote comparing, so it's like, I don't know, like they tell you, or try to tell you, look, you're stupid. You don't know how to do anything. Get off. I'll do it, right? Well, David versus Goliath. So also in brigadistas, they compare kind of this state's super powerful actor as making communities feel like they can't do anything. And acts of destruction are also very much targeting and seeming to remedy that. So anyway, just to conclude, so I think turning to imaginary to understand actions. Imagining a desired community in balance is what brigadistas are working towards through their acts, which is for them achieved through violent destruction of violent intruders. So I mean, I'm not talking about this in my presentation because of time, but I mean, people, they compare being in the brigadas as being in a war and fighting, and it's very violent in that sense, but it's a violence that is aimed at the violence that these trees are inflicting upon other trees, and also upon human life. So anyway, and this is also inextricable from historical socio-political oppression for brigadistas. So just to summarize then, also the ways of knowing that contribute to this imaginary, but also draw on this imaginary as like a iterative process, is embodied knowledge. So the experience of eradication, the the practices of destruction that I lined out earlier are very very hard. It's not like you cut down a tree and that's it, but it's like you cut down a tree, there have to be all these people around one tree because it's falling, it's tearing apart other trees that you do want to have to continue living. You cut down a eucalyptus tree and it will come back 4 years, 5 years. It just keeps coming back. So you have to keep going to the same trunk in order to kill one tree. So it's this kind of embodied experience that really shapes how brigadistas then engage with these trees and also imagine how the monte should be. It's also in my study, I also talk about how brigadistas also draw on scientific knowledge, on scientific exchange as scientists that come to do talks, experiments, and so on, because it's not like this dichotomy between the state and scientific knowledge and local communities and, you know, just traditional practices, but it's an intermixing. So it's not as easy as saying, oh, these people are embodied experiencing these trees in the monte, and that's why they have such different imaginary. But it's an iterative process, so it's not completely linear. Positive is this leads to this. Collective memory, stories, experiences, also family members, and so on. So these are all ways that, you know, contribute to how the monte and a desirable monte is imagined. So just a takeaway. This is the takeaway. Basically, what I wanted to say is that I call destructionist care. It's practiced by the brigadas, which constructs particular trees as unwanted by bringing together different ways of knowing and imaginaries of collective flourishing, and particular collective, right? So attending to imaginaries and ways of knowing enables understanding diverse economic activities. I wonder, I think, and I hope that perhaps maybe avenues of research could, you know, draw on this and communicate with this and maybe negate this, or I don't know, and their contribution to social, ecological, economic change. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Noortje. That was very stimulating. What an interesting perspective on violence. I look forward to the discussions on this as well. Yes, well, I think if everybody is okay, we should perhaps take a 5-minute break, since there's been a lot of input, just to stretch our legs, and then we'll be back at 4 for Colm's presentation. Yeah, great. See you in 5 minutes. So welcome back, everyone, to the second part of this session. I see there's some new people joining, so I'll just say hello. I'm Christina Yana. I'm chairing this session on new scholarship and community economies. So far, we've had Markus and Noortje presenting 2 fascinating studies and very different, both empirically and theoretically. And now it's the last presentation will be Colm Stockdale's on transformative social innovation and rural collaborative workplaces, assembling community economies in Austria and Greece. So when you're ready to Colm, the word is yours.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Christina. Yeah, so that was the title of my thesis, and I also took advice from Jenny Cameron on focusing on this one thing after multiple emails. So I said I'd try to focus on let's say cultivating diverse subjectivities and look at this aspect. So yeah, I defended in April, so I thought it'd be a lot easier maybe coming back and like slightly changing presentations, which took a bit more work than I thought, but I think I got there in the end. So just a small introduction. So my PhD really looked at social innovation. So I understood that really is like how grassroots social innovations can take action in creating new ethical economies. So that's kind of the entry point to diverse and community economies. And the main kind of like, let's say, relations through meeting social needs. So through the work of Frank Miller. And in his understanding, there's 3 different, let's say, interrelated dimensions of social innovation. So it's about meeting human needs, changing social relations, which this presentation is mainly about. And then that through this collective empowerment, it can lead to transformative impact for communities. And I looked at this then really through community-led rural collaborative workspaces, which is a catch-all term really for just kind of shared spaces where, let's say, there's a form of labor. So it can be co-working spaces, maker spaces. My main focus, as you'll see, is social cultural centers, really. And these, like when it's the more community-led aspect of it, like they kind of a more specific focus on actually meeting needs of communities and also acting as like focal points for collective organizing. And also there's, research has shown that there's potential of these to actually foster economic diversity. And I look at this really through both individual and collective subjectivity. So how they influence the individual and then also the collective. I have two case studies. So one in rural Austria and one in rural Greece. I spent a month in each location and I did interviews and participatory observation. So these are my two case studies. So we have Otello, which is located in a small town, Forkdorf, in Upper Austria, and then Messalughi by locals, which is in a town in Western Greece called Messalughi. So they're two very contrasting case studies because one is quite a wealthy, small Austrian town, and in Messalughi, it's a small town that's really still feeling the effects of austerity, and yeah, in the Greek context. So the whole town was centered around a university, and then in around 2017, I think the university got moved to the closest city, so the whole town's economy collapsed. Whereas in Austria, then it's a small town. It's look on the development kind of levels and everything. It looks to be doing quite well. It kind of scores quite high on GDP per capita and all of these. But the reason, let's say, for Otello actually coming into being was that the founders felt that there's too much of a focus, let's say, on a capitalist economy and this kind of top-down idea of capital-centric economic development, and they felt that there's many other things missing in their town. So they basically came up with the idea of Otello, which is one organization which has two parts. So there's the association, which is a free voluntary association. It's municipal funded. So this is actually, it's based in a school. So they're in the basement of a school. So the big building is the school. You can see Otello there. And actually underneath then they have some rooms that are basically open space for the community to use. So the idea is that anyone can come, and if they have an idea, they can come and work on the idea. They can go a bit deeper, they can form groups and explore this idea further. Then also there's a worker cooperative that basically emerged from the association when people who were involved in the association kind of realized, okay, they're putting a lot of work into this and they do need to get paid. Made up of mainly freelancers in the cultural and creative industries. And the idea is that people can do work that's both personally fulfilling and community oriented. So some people work with projects related to the association, and others are just freelancers in their own time. In Greece, then, yeah, as I said, like it's this town facing this kind of narrative of decline and stagnation, and the founders, maybe there's a lot of young people leaving. There's no job opportunities, but they try this kind of assets-based approach to community development. So you can see from the picture here in the bottom right corner, like it's based on a lagoon. These are like traditional fishermen houses that they have, let's say, in the town. And they basically try to show what the town has. So it has like interesting history, culture, traditions, and they try to map all of this. And they also collaborate with people in the town who actually are doing something. Um, and yeah, so as I said, I'm looking at this, like how they influence both individual and collective subjectivities. So on the individual level, despite their differences in the towns, like what both, let's say, collaborative workspaces do is that they actually help individuals with their own personal goals, their passions, their desires, and this actually increases these people's agency and gives them like maybe a purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning. So both of them have, let's say, a pool of resources that they offer to the community, face of the places themselves, knowledge, materials, networks, etc., to help people with their desires. So in Austria, as I said, like there might be a strong economy, but let's say outside of this maybe people have a lacking of purpose or direction in their lives. So they try to help people find what they say is like what they really, really want. So by having this model of open free space, and the idea is that people can come there and there's no pressure to actually produce anything. If people want to produce something, one of the co-founders, he used to work in the field of regional development, so he is very able to kind of find funding streams and money for projects if people want to actually create something from that. So this could be something like these are things that people have done, so like a food cooperative, a 3D printing company, or even like a dance group. So it's this kind of very diverse understanding of what people can do. And I think this quote is nice that this person says you can come, you can live your interest and not your profession. So if you're an electrician but you like knitting, you can just go and be part of a knitting group. In Mesologi, then, yeah, it's this feeling of kind of being left behind. And so what they do, that they provide a platform for locals to actually showcase what they can do. So they can do this by supporting people on social media. They're very active. They also host events. So if people play music, they can come and play in the place. If there's an event going on, maybe they for example, they have like speakers and a microphone, and they will give that out to people if they're doing an event, and they'll use those speaker and microphone for free. Photography equipment. For example, an artist used the space as a studio. In exchange, then he did art lessons for the community. They also helped like an older woman to publish a children's book. So the idea is that they also have this free space, just the idea of open space that people can come and follow their ideas, and it kind of helps them with their own agency, especially let's say in the case of Mesologi, when you have this feeling that there's nothing going on, but if you can actually follow something that you're interested in, it can really increase your own capacities, give you a sense of agency. And basically, from let's say influencing people on the individual level, this feeds into the collective. So you can probably see I used assemblage thinking a bit in my thesis, so I'm going to kind of go into that a bit now. But basically, as let's say people increase their own capacities and let's say take part maybe in some activities of the hubs, they actually become a component into the assemblage of this collaborative workspace assemblage, as I call it. So then along with other, let's say, human and non-human components, they are all assembled to create different, let's say, events, activities, things going on in both places. So let's say in Mesologi, for example, you can get people along with the lagoon that's there, the fisherman's boat, and the various infrastructure along with that, and they might carry out an educational program, or for example, technology, volunteer labor, materials that people donated. In Otello, they have this repair cafe that they run, I think every 2 weeks or something like that. And it's just, again, it's like the idea of having an open space. People can come, they can have a chat. If they have stuff that they want repaired, they can come. All they need to do is at least try to repair it. They have people there then that actually will repair it if they can't. But beyond like the actual idea of like, let's say, not having any waste and throwing stuff out, the idea is that it opens a space where people can come, they can socialize, they can, just do something outside of, let's say, consumption or work. So education programs, the repair cafe, as I said, there's a death cafe, which was probably one of the more interesting ones, where people would just come and talk about death in different forms, like how they perceive it, what they think about it. So it's not always something, let's say, productive, but it's this idea of maybe being in common. In Greece, then they also do an annual festival. So this is what this kind of lower picture is of. They do an annual festival every year, just about local cultural traditions, have music, and just trying to have a bit of life, let's say, in the town. They also collaborate with some institutions. So as I said, Otello is based in school, and it's completely funded by the municipality. I don't think I mentioned that. So like all the bills and everything is paid by the municipality. So they have this really free space. That's why they don't need to, let's say, create companies and get a return on investment, because it is just this, let's say, free space. Also in Greece, though, they also collaborate with schools through the education program, and they have slowly started to work with the municipality. The municipality changed, I think, in the last 2 years, so they started to actually collaborate with them. And yeah, I think the idea is that, like, this quote is from the founder of Mesologi by Locals, where he says he's referring to like art classes, and he's like, okay, it's about an art class, and the art classes came because the community said that there's no art classes. So they provide this service, but the idea is that it's not only, let's say, to help people for drawing, but it's actually to be part of a team. And then no culture of collaboration in the town. Everyone is kind of feeling this idea of stagnation and nothing's happening. So it's the idea of actually building a culture of collaboration. Maybe it's already there in Austria, but here they need to build it. So the idea is that you're not just part of a class, but you're a member of the community as well. This is then a mapping kind of both places that I actually did in the Norway summer school with some help from Kevin and the students as well that was there. I won't go too deep into it, but you can see like both places have huge diversity, I think. So like both in terms of like the type of enterprise there, what types of labor at play, the transactions. So you have some market, so reciprocal donations, so such as the repair cafe, as I said, people in Messaluggy come, they might give books, they might give different like the equipment, like they'll actually donate that to the place because they believe in the cause of what they're doing. Also in terms of property, like both the place that it is, but then also that, let's say in Greece, they do like different actions throughout the town. So in some squares, they might actually do some commoning practices, or in Otello, for example, it's a municipal funded space, but it has a commons like governance. So they're very diverse, and these kind of logics are always at play with whatever they do. And this is kind of a fancy diagram that I put together, kind of showing how this is all at play. So basically, we have these material and expressive components, let's say people, let's say funding, whatever, ideas, narratives, these all get assembled into the collaborative workspace assemblage under these logics, let's say, of the diverse economy that influence both people on the individual level and the collective level through creating hybrid collectives as well, which is common in the diverse economies. We see it a lot. So be it creative workshops, be it educational programs, any of these things that they influence on the collective level. And what these do then is actually create capacity for collective action. And then this all feeds back into everything in the kind of process. It just maintains and keeps going. So although I said like the individual feeds into the collective, but they happen at the same time. Like I think the idea isn't exactly let's work with individuals and then we'll build collective, but they work, there's an interplay, let's say, between both of them. And these actually create effective relations that just kind of flow out through the whole thing. That's kind of reason for the arrows. So I mean, they benefit individuals through their own agency. The town benefits then from this, more so in Greece, the sense of identity and belonging. But in both cases, we have these new development pathways that are created from, you know, be it a dance group, be it a repair cafe, a 3D printing company, art studios. It was the case actually in Greece. Like all these different things emerge. But then also the collaborative workspace itself benefits from all this because they actually get the effective labor of the people, and that also actually helps in the reproduction of the space. So the cultivation of these actual effective relations is all like, as I said, like we have these events, activities, and these are happening, but it's also the everyday, these in-between relations that actually form these subject positions. You know, who am I? I'm a community member, I'm a family member, I'm a fisherman, I'm also, I don't know, you know, a consumer, like everything fits in together and it makes people think about these through these practices of care, reciprocity, being in common. Yeah, and as I said, these processes lead to collective action. I won't have fully time to go into this, but there's basically two examples. So in Austria, they have a refugee group. So both of these examples, like they're groups that exist, but they actually flow throughout the town. They're not just confined, let's say, to the place. So refugee group was about when the war in Ukraine or the invasion of Ukraine even broke out. There's a pre-existing refugee group since 2015, but it basically got like reactivated as more and more people got concerned. And they basically did like a mass collection throughout the town to send, let's say, basic supplies to Ukraine. But then also when refugees arrived into the town, they had groups there readily available to like integrate them into the community, find them housing, and just help them with any of their needs. In Greece, they have like a participatory education program that I've mentioned that it's funded through the state, and they work with the local ecologists and a fisherman's cooperative with a network of schools. So they provide this education to children of the area about like the importance of the lagoon. It's not just, let's say, a place where they fish, but it has ecological importance for the region. The fishermen work with the ecology of the lagoon. They just don't just fish for commercial processes. And basically they explain all of this, and then the children have like creative methods to show how they understood this. And then one thing that's very interesting is that with the institutions that I see that they actually kind of recode them to their own logics. It's kind of a reverse form of co-optation, where like they're quite believe in their own values, so they don't, let's say, you see it a lot maybe that these kinds of initiatives might have to water themselves down when they interact with institutions, but they're kind of quite firm on their own values. So, for example, in Austria, they say like they have an agreement now with the municipality for the last 10 years to fund them without necessarily producing something, because they've been able to show through like experience basically what the value of what they do is. So they basically are funded without any need to provide like a return on investment, because it's quite clear. In Greece as well, then they collaborate with schools. They also started to collaborate with the municipality, as I said. They didn't collaborate with the previous municipality because they kind of had this antagonistic relationship with them. But they did like an open kind of town hall thing where anyone could come, give their 2 cents on how they viewed the town's development, and through participatory manner, kind of trying to work that out together. So just to conclude, really, I think, yeah, one of the main contributions, I think, of like this diverse and community economy framework, it really gave a full picture for what's going on. Like if I had this capital-centric worldview, I think I would have just like, if you look on the surface level, you might see an organization that wants to accelerate touristic development in a small town, or this kind of cooperative of freelancers that carries out these technology projects with surface things and the relations that are cultivated, both in the individual, the collective, subjectivities, all of this. And yeah, I kind of have a whole chapter on this really, so it's hard, it's there in one line, but at the interstitial level of the social innovations, let's say, as the bottom link, when they connect with these institutions, going to show how that it actually provides a pathway for post-capitalist transformation, like actually moving beyond what we call the interstitial level, but moving on to kind of symbiotic and rupture levels. So I think we can only understand them as open-ended becomings, because even after I finished my field work, maybe about 6 months later, this thing's kind of town hall, so I took part in it. Also in Austria, it's the same, like there was open-ended, always changing, and I think there's always new possibilities and new things changing. So it's quite interesting to always keep note, I guess, of these places, like when you do PhD, evolving. So I'll close it off there, and hopefully we can have a nice discussion.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Colm. That was wonderful, and a very interesting comparative perspective, which we haven't had so far, on also not only on community economy possibilities, but also municipal endorsement of these, which is great. So now I'll give the word to Kevin and Maliha. I don't know which order you'd like to go in, but
your choice, Kevin.
Okay.
Like, honestly, I feel like I went first last time, but if you want to go first this time, that's totally fine with me.
Sure, I'll jump in first, no problem. I just, by way of caveat, in this kind of quick listening to quick presentations, one tries to grab on and hold something that and can say about, which is to say, don't expect a kind of comprehensive response at this point from a presentation. I'm just not able to do that, but hopefully able to draw out some things that I find interesting, maybe some things to think a little critically about. and I'll just go in order of people presenting. And I think I have like 6 minutes or something. Is that right, Christina? Or 8 minutes or?
Yeah, say 5 to 10 actually. So
5 to 10. Okay. Well, please stop me if I go beyond 8.
sure.
Okay. So Markus, thank you so much. So interesting. I really enjoyed hearing you, and I really love the reaching for models. You know, like I just find those kinds of circles and lines on the one hand really aspirational for me. Like but then I also find them challenging at the same time for me to kind of grasp in a quick way. And I worry too a little bit about the the way they box and line and stuff. So I appreciate your use of them, absolutely. And I work with lots of scientists who use that kind of language, that kind of graphic language. And I really, I guess I'm also a bit jealous of it and I want to deploy it because it's powerful, you know, it's really quite a powerful approach. That's a super general comment, doesn't really say anything about your project except this kind of acknowledgement of the way it was presented. But I think though, a little more theoretically, it does, you know, I sensed in your project a bit of a, and maybe I'm wrong, a bit of a tension between, you know, the blueprint that the model kind of points to in some sense, this kind of model of the way things should be or the way things definitively are and will be in the future, or this thing that I'm modeling is what we should work toward. You know, there's a bit of a, in my mind, maybe a tension always, not just in your work, but always between that and kind of a weak theory stance of like, I don't know, and let me see how people are doing things, you know, and you have that, of course, in your project too, right? So there's, in my mind, I don't know enough about your project to understand how that's resolved or how that's thought through. So I'm just flagging that as like what I've noticed in the presentation and what I'm intrigued by. And I would also say too that just to shift a little bit away from that, I'm really intrigued by, you know, examples, cases, stories from what, you know, I'm old enough that we used to call it the second world, right? Which is to say neither the first world of the Western developed um, countries and the third world of those that are just really mostly former colonized places that are don't have quote developed economies, and then this second world, which was the Soviet world, right, where you had a different kind of development that was really quite profound and industrial and modern in so many ways itself. But anyway, in my work and in I think maybe more broadly in a kind of imaginary of development, you know, what's intriguing about what we used to call the third world was that that can be a site of economic difference almost by definition, either by being the frontier of capitalism or the place capitalism is penetrating. But even when you use that language, you're acknowledging that there's an economic difference that's resident. You may think of it as lacking and archaic and pre-modern, but nevertheless, there is an imaginary of economic difference. And, you know, some of that like international development stuff leans on that difference and says, oh, let's build a women's cooperative here in the third world. And in the first world, I'm sorry to keep using that language, but it's appropriately, I'm just drawing on a past language. I don't mean to impose that hierarchy again, but to kind of critique it. But anyway, in what was the first world, you know, you could only imagine capitalism, and capitalism was all encompassing and everywhere. So there was no place for economic difference. And then in this second world, this is what's so intriguing to me, that economic difference is so proximate, you know, like that's how we used to live. We lived under a totally different economy, and we knew it was a totally different economy. And now we're struggling with a capitalist economy and wanting to become it. And like there's something about that proximity that's so intriguing to me, because it's often seen in the negative, like we don't want another economy, we want the capitalist economy. But for some people, it's like, but at least I know you can organize life, economy, nation in a totally different register. Like it's possible, right? In some weird way. And I just find that like super intriguing. I don't, again, I don't know where that goes for any of us, but I just wanted to point that out as interesting to me. And on the surplus question, like, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I'm like, doesn't every society have surplus? Like, weren't we, like, isn't that just fundamental concept? And then I began thinking about like sufficiency and sustainability, not sustainability, subsistence and sufficiency, this other language that you use. And I thought, well, subsistence economies have surplus and sufficient economies have surplus. Like that, they're just not the same concepts to me, I guess. And I was wondering how to think through that. And so I'll just point that out as well as something that is interesting to me. And then finally, I can't help myself, just by way of a tiny critique, that like drawing on the enterprise chapter from Take Back the Economy to then say community economies don't pay enough attention to a whole range of things beyond production and immediate surplus, I think is a tad unfair. Like, I think the very opening of the community, like if you go, like there's an irony to an approach to understanding economy that started from a critique of an obsession with productivism, and built that into its DNA, to then find that that's what you see when you look at that community economy literature. Like, I'm worried about that, I guess, and I'm a little concerned about it. So I just want to flag that. I'll move on to Noortje's now. Thank you so much for the presentation about commons. Total, like, let's shift gears and go to Galicia and the commons, like really different case study. And there I just really loved the whole focus on imaginary, and then like on, like, as if there's you have imaginary way over here, and then you have let's cut down trees like way over here, you know. One is like couldn't be more material and like expressive of like wanting to take action and like reclaim Galicia, like all kinds of things. And the other is like at this realm of like the imaginary, and is this care, or is this violence, is this, I find that super fascinating. And what I thought was, what I don't know is if your work fills in the middle. Do you know what I mean? Like, how does, and I'm going to shift language to what I know, like how does discourse become, like, actually constitute material differences in the world, you know? And I just kept falling back on that language of discourse rather than imaginary. And you never mentioned the word, but it's so fundamental to the community economies thinking that it made me think like, you were kind of like finding allies in community economy stuff because it was focused on commons and kind of reclaiming those commons or reactivating them, or I don't know what. But that's, whereas in my mind, like the resonance with community economies was at this other level of like, of starting from discourse, and what are the dominant discourses, what's the hegemonic discourse, what's the alternative discourse, how do we activate those discourses, how do they end up actually producing material difference and different lives and so on. So I found that's the part for me that resonated with community economies, and somehow it wasn't quite as strong there for you. And I just thought, well, maybe we can both learn a lot from each other's projects by tracing from the discourse or the imaginary to the cut tree. I mean, you do that, but there's kind of a leap in my mind a little bit. And I wanted to fill in that gap a little bit with you, I guess.
You're at 8 minutes, Kevin, just so you know.
Thank you so much. The last thing I would say about Noortje, though, is I really love the destruction as care, you know, because it made me think like, discursive practices, you know, they struggle with each other, you know, like this idea of opening and difference, I think often misses the point that there's always a struggle and a desire to destroy, at least in my mind, like that, you know, like let's get rid of capitalism, right? Like it's in its form, and that seems to, there's a parallel there. There's something there to dig at that's about, you know, destruction as care is not exceptional. It's the rule when you're talking about things replacing other things. I mean, it's things have to be destroyed, right? Like it's part of, it's simply to say that rethinking economy is a site of struggle, and struggle requires a benefactor and a victim, I suppose, in some sense. Anyway, maybe I'm making too much. Colm, thank you so much. I really love this project, and I've seen glimpses of it from the summer school, and now I'm seeing it more fully, and I'm just really enjoying it. And I'll try to be quick because I know I only have 1 or 2 minutes. But I'm looking at my notes here, and I'm going to jump to the end of my notes, which you ended on and then if I have time, I'll go back. You talked about this open-ended becomings, you know, at the end, and I love that imagery of openness, and like then the diverse economies table points to the multiplicity of things going on and different ways that economy is enacted across different registers. So also pointing to that kind of openness and expansiveness of possibility, which of course is the diverse economies project, right? But then the part that I wanted to know a little more, and very likely you do it in your work, but again, in this short presentation, is like when I hear like subjective transformation, or subjective becoming or shift in subjectivity, like my mind goes directly to from a specific one to a specific other, you know, which is very different than open to everything, you know, and I guess I wanted to hear or see a little bit about that specificity, you know, and similarly with like the assemblage logic, like when I hear that, I'm like, what assemblage specifically are you talking about? You know, it's not just like a bunch of things coming together in a site. It's like things coming together with a purpose and with a kind of, you know, a coherence is being formed. Like, what is that coherence, and how is it? What is its relationship to specific subjectivity positionalities? You know, like that's. Because I don't know, like calling it this or that, or it's anti-capitalist or it's not, like it's in that specificity that we pull it out. And of course you do a lot of that, but it's in that register of like people sense of belonging, increasing capacity, increasing agency. I'm like, well, those may or may not be specific shifts from one specific subject position to another. Like, I don't know for sure, right? And again, for all three of you, thank you so much. And I'm sure a lot of what I'm saying, you've thought an awful lot about. And I'm just sort of reflecting back what I'm hearing and what I'm intrigued by. So thank you for that.
It was hard not to jump in, but I thought, okay, best to kind of let you speak independently. But I echo some of definitely what you say. And Christina, could I get a 7-minute reminder just so I make sure and I at least, okay, thanks. So let me start with, I guess I'll go in the order of that we went in. And so Markus, I loved that quote from, sorry, I'm trying to find my summary of, okay, the Papawa quote, Homo transformaticus, which he makes up, clearly, right? It's made up. And that's funny to me too, but the resuscitation of the Homo economicus. And I'm also wondering if you came across the work of Sam Bowles, which I think is relevant to some of your work too. There's a whole other school that's trying to also argue that reciprocity, Homo reciprocans, is probably the majority, let's say, way that we can think about human evolution itself as taking place through this other, not Homo economicus, but Homo reciprocans, right? And in some ways, that is also something that you're working towards in some of those examples, like the urban projects that are sort of characterized by reciprocity, not necessarily extraction, right? And Number two. So yes, so very early, in fact, before you describe the enterprises themselves, you tell us that there is no surplus because wages are not necessary for reproduction of the people involved. And immediately all kinds of questions also came off in my head too about, wait a second, just because wages are very low for and do not allow for reproduction, that's just a sign of exploitation. That's not a sign that there's no surplus, because Walmart, for instance, at least famously in this country, underpays its workers and they actually cannot survive on the wages that they're given and they qualify for food benefits, right? So that's an example that low wages does not mean no surplus. But then it also so then I thought, well, but I could have used a little bit of a snapshot of what types of firms are we. So before you actually tell us what you think about the surplus and the necessary labor, it would be helpful to have, here's the kinds of things that I'm talking about. The foraging that came out as one case study, but I was curious, like how many firms? Are there farms? Because then I thought maybe on a farm, I could see, okay, if the farm is not even able to reproduce itself, then maybe there he meant that there's no surplus. So that was the order needed a little bit of work to kind of actually get us to your theoretical conclusion. And I also think that there are, while this question about the distinction between necessary and surplus is one that, for instance, comes up in the discussion of interdependence itself in post-capitalist politics. But definitely theoretically, probably some of the people that have worked on this are Jenny Cameron. Jenny Cameron's work on ancient producers and how do you think about the household and what's necessary versus surplus. There, she does a lot of critical work to say maybe we have a wrong understanding of the class process itself precisely because we are not understanding the boundaries between necessary and surplus. So there are some people who have looked at this question, certainly directly in the terms that you want to look at it, right? And I agreed with Kevin that there's a tension between the diagrams which sort of describe these relations and the work that the theoretical work where you're trying to actually say we need to question and renegotiate the very understanding between the boundary and necessary and surplus. So you want to do a radical, let's say, ontological opening. At the same time, the diagrams don't necessarily, I mean, but maybe I'll just stop there because you see that there's a tension there between the representation and what it is that you seek to do theoretically. And I'll last say that maybe one person, of course, that might be useful in all this theoretically on peasant producers and in Russia and Soviet republics was Chayanov, right? And Chayanov was the one to argue peasant mode of production is indeed, and maybe peasant mode of production is actually closer to what you're trying to get to with sufficiency. And in fact, some of what he argues is going to be the thing that makes Stalin, right, arrest him and execute him. So, okay, so Noortje, so I loved the idea of the brigadas are the A team. And it was so sort of interesting to me because I used to try to teach class through film and television, but then I stopped using A-team references because no 20-year-olds actually even know what A-team means. But I kind of understood, right? That A-team was actually also something that for the most part, they were not paid for the actions that they undertook. And so I liked that kind of analogy. And this was the thing, is that as we're kind of, first you start out with, I'm going to do this case, you describe the case study. And then in the description itself of the removal of the bark, etc., I noticed that you started speaking as we were doing this and we did this and then I understood halfway through the presentation that you are not just an observer, you are also a participant. And I understand that you finished your dissertation, which is congratulations for that. That's amazing. But also I want you to think a little bit in going forward, how do you phrase the work that you did? And is it possible that maybe this wasn't the language that you used while you were doing it, or maybe it was, I don't know, but participatory action research allows you to begin with the we. It doesn't need to come out in the description unconsciously. It can be in the framing of the work itself and the analysis, right? And I'd
7
like you to,
minutes.
yes. So I'll just say one other point to Noortje and then move on. Thank you. Also when you describe it as violent destruction of violent species, and I want us, or I'm inviting you to think about, could the categorization of violent be discursive and imaginary as well? And I loved those quotes; those were amazing. And I'm not contesting that that might be the way that the brigadas think about removal of invasive species. But as a person who's volunteered in invasive species removal in the forest that is on my Drew campus, the bio department leads that project in spring at different points. And it's a different discourse of restoration, and it's not at all it was actually surprising to me to think of it as removal of invasive species is a violent act, because I don't think that that's the way I've ever understood caretaking of gardens or even forests in those terms of violence, right? Even if so I guess I'm thinking, even if the brigadas are using that language, is that the only language that could be used to think about removal of invasive species? And what might, let's say, plurification do there? And certainly, cool. So I loved that, in the very last slide, you sort of say, okay, some people could frame this as not just as tourism, as two tourism boards doing more like creative city. But it was also clear from your description and from the very beginning, the idea that, sounded like Otello was saying they want a non-capitalist development model, and it would be great to like pull some, let's say, quotes to show how it was that Otello is deploying that discourse, even in its sort of no doubt official kinds of language. And that seemed really valuable to me, really, really valuable, because it's so often the case that all of these kinds of efforts are just immediately lumped in with a capitalocentric framing. And that's not equal to certainly what they do on the ground. And here, when you filled out the table, I thought, oh, why aren't all of these other fascinating things like the Death Cafe, the Repair Cafe, those things were not, I mean, just because you had that version of the table, then you can drop in and add a lot more detail now that from the earlier, for instance, work and the slides themselves that showcase the different kinds of activities, and put those in the table to kind of help, right, a new person understand that landscape approach. And I also want to draw your attention, maybe you already know the work of Amanda Huron, but her work on the urban commons feels very sort of relevant to your work, because in a lot of ways, the sites that you're describing are sites of urban commons, right? And she looks at housing cooperatives as sites of urban commons. And then, but you could be looking at, the building where the Death Cafe, the Repair Cafe, the history, that entity or that assemblage, let's say, of activities could be the site of an urban commons. And her work was really great, but it also looked at one specific type. And you are looking at really these kinds of fluid, multi-stakeholder entities where I think the case is even easier to make, right? That there's an urban commons being developed here, enacted here. What does it mean to draw very diverse kinds of communities, especially because commons literature has usually examined homogeneous communities and dealing with a natural resource, but that's not what the urban commons are doing, something else. And so I think that might be a sort of useful idea for you to also play with. I'll stop there. I'm definitely at time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Both Maliha and Kevin, thank you so much for your generative and thought-provoking reactions. This has taken these presentations in so many new directions for me. So given that we have 9 minutes, I think that the best way to go about using the rest of our time is through passion. So the chat will be telling us who has urgent reactions. It can be anyone from the authors or anyone else in this room who just has to, who feels like adding to this conversation. And what do we have? No passion here. No, that can't be possible. So Tom would like to hear responses. Okay, well, then who would like to respond?
Yeah, no, I just thought all these presentations were amazing, and then the responses were so rich. I know there's not enough time to even start to touch off it, but like Markus, for example, as well, or anyone really who would have something they'd like to add, or yeah.
Maybe we could do a strict 2 minutes each. Colm, do you want to go first? You were last in presenting, so.
I can hop in, yeah. Thank you to both for very nice comments. I'll start to reply to Kevin. So yeah, unfortunately, you can't fit a full thesis into a 20-minute presentation. So you miss some of the background and explanations and whatever. Simple answer, I would say to both. First one for like what the purpose and what assemblage and what purpose. I mean, I'm basically obviously there's multiple assemblages at play and whatever, but I mean the main one is this collaborative workspace assemblage. So like there's theory about understanding these spaces as assemblages. So it's them. And the idea is, their purpose or their abstract machine, basically as I call it, like what they're actually doing is actually the goal is to create community economies. So that's, let's say, the end goal. And that's why they create all these different activities and whatever with the end goal, let's say, of creating that, which also kind of answers the second one, which was about subjectivities and transformation. And I probably blurred it a bit maybe in this presentation because I know there's a lot of work, subjectivities and subjects and languages needs to be particular. But I guess mainly like in simply just like moving from subjects of the capitalist economy to the subjects of the community economy. That's the simple answer. Kind of, or like this neoliberal individualized subject towards more community economy subject. I won't go much deeper because I think we can give space to others. And then, yeah, more just thanks to Malia. Yeah, they're all solid. I'm familiar with Amanda who runs work. She's like an advisor for a project of my supervisor actually. So it's a funny coincidence there. But no, thank you very much for the comments. I'll give the floor to the others.
Okay, I can say something. I'm not very good at organizing responses, but firstly, yeah, thank you to both the feedback givers, respondents. I think very good comments, and just like Colm said, it's hard to fit everything into the presentation, especially the methodological things that I did and assumptions I made, because indeed it was participatory research that I undertook over the course of 2 years with this group. And sometimes indeed this we, they thing comes in, and I also reflect upon that in my thesis, right? Like this whole leaving the field thing. didn't really happen. So so that's something that I talk about in my thesis, and I also think I think within community economies there's also space to reflect upon those kinds of ways of doing research, and how kind of particular mainstream practices are questionable in terms of like how we talk about our subjects and the things that we study from a distance, right? So I did that in my thesis, and that also relates to the comments about the violence and destruction, whereas, you know, this is restoration, right? This is restoration of nature and so on. Of course, there's many ways to talk about this, and actually there are scholars who have done research with the brigadas under the frame of restoration. So it's not whether it's one thing or the other. I think my research, what I talk about in my thesis, is very much about how do we know trees, nature, and so on, and how does that inform our practices and how we imagine what we're doing, right? So like that's kind of the circle that I try to communicate, and I think that's also why this violence comes in, because the people that I work with are living in areas that are completely surrounded by eucalyptus or acacia, which are extremely flammable species. They're pyrophyte species, where fires have destroyed everything, including houses. So there's very much fear. It's a very much embodied experience, which is rather different from restoration projects that maybe, you know, have a more, I don't want to say scientific, but formal scientific basis based on like species interactions and so on. And I think that's kind of what I also wanted to communicate, or what I communicate in my work. And I think it's an interesting, how do you say, like angle to explore how communities and these activities. And finally, I think this thing, I wrote about this in my thesis, but I really want to explore it. I mean, it's obvious, but it's also really cool, I think, with the whole destruction and construction as sides of the same coin, right? So like destroy, creation, like how do those two realms interact in a more theoretical sense? I think that was a great comment, and I would love to think more about that. I can't say anything intelligent about it right now, but I've definitely, I've been thinking about that, and especially what I see the brigadas doing. Sorry, I need to. Yes. But this is the opposite, right? Like Schumpeter is doing. But what they're doing is with the brigadas and these kinds of initiatives is, you know, destroying capitalist material, but also mind spaces in order to create diversity, whatever they imagine they're doing, right? So I think it's definitely an angle I want to explore more, but. I mean, that's the thing, right? Your case studies, they can give for so many directions. And I think today I shared one direction, but it's definitely cool to think about more. So thank you.
Markus, you want to give your last 2 minutes?
Very short, and also thanks for not only thinking about the presentation, but with your own thoughts about it. A very general comment also on graphs. I spent countless of hours on these graphs, and I'm still not satisfied with any of those. So I agree also with you here. There is always this difficulty that you have a graph, and it also has the surplus meanings. Like it has more than one meaning. So I can totally relate to this, what you're saying. Then the funny thing about, let's say, necessary surplus, these are also philosophical traditions that I partly relate to. And it's very funny. So my dissertation is also a cumulative one. So it's paper-based. One paper will soon come, and it will be Rethinking Marxism. I had to take out one section about Chayano, but as you mentioned it, Maliha, the point was also, and maybe also Kevin's interest with the Second World, let's say it like this. So Stalin wanted to press out the surplus from the Russian peasants to urbanize the Soviet Union and build an industrial country. Chayanov just said, like, the Russian peasant, generalized, is not interested in producing surplus for anyone. The Russian peasant is interested in producing only what is necessary to survive on a basic level. You could say it's necessary labor, you could say it's efficiency. This is exactly, I think, where I also try to plot this discussion. And there are a lot of, let's say, philosophical discussions for me then also, like, you save something for the future, that you might use in order to survive, like can you call this surplus or necessity? And also a lot with this mutual aid, like for people it was not something surplus, where often people relegated, but it was often something like a necessity. Of course, I help my neighbor, I help my community. So these are, I think, also, let's say it like this, for me, very interesting questions that I wanted to open here. But nonetheless, I think we should all collectively think about this question further, because I think there is an interesting conversation hopefully going on, because I see the notion of sufficiency popping up quite a lot recently. But thanks a lot for all these nice comments, hints.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your work and sharing your and for thinking together. I've certainly been very much enriched in these past 2 hours. Thank you all, and I hope to see you again another time. Goodbye, and have a great afternoon or evening or morning or whatever you are.
Thanks, Christina, for facilitating. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you and congratulations for the good work.